Welcome, Maverick Gamers. It's Dwayne here, and we are starting our 2025 content stream off by talking about Daggerheart. Now, I know you're probably used to tuning into my channel for Dungeons & Dragons content. Don't worry, that content will continue, but for this year, at least to start off the year, I wanted to focus on something that has really captured my attention, and this channel has always been about what I find passionate, and I do find Dungeons & Dragons passionate and role-playing in general, but Daggerheart has really gotten me fired up, and to that extent, I want to dedicate some time on my channel to talking about Daggerheart, maybe educating people who don't know what it's all about, and just covering some of the basics. Now, I do have a disclaimer. The fact that Daggerheart is not released yet means that all I have to rely on is the public playtest that's available on Demiplane. So for the majority of the content that I'm going to be talking about in the early months here leading up to the release of the game is going to be pulled from the playtest. I'll make efforts to actually notify you if I know that there's any changes to how it's being played, but in general, the information I'm going to share with you should be able to be usable whether you're going to be waiting for the whole game to come out or whether you're just testing into the playtest material. So let's dive in and let's talk about Daggerheart. So one of the things that I've always liked to do when making a character is I conceptualize it before I actually start getting down into the math and the nitty-gritty of actually creating the character. So usually what I do is I go onto the internet and I look for a picture, or when I was younger, I would just brainstorm a visual in my mind. But in light of all the technology that we have surrounding us today with AI tools and all sorts of artwork that is splashed all over the internet, probably the best thing to do is just go and have a look at some pictures. Artwork has always inspired me, and it's what drives me to create new characters and new adventures. So I'm going to settle on this piece of artwork right here. I'm going to put that up while we actually make the character, so you can sort of see how I'm taking the inspiration from the illustration that I found and making a character around it. So if you haven't already gone to Demiplane and created an account, I would recommend doing that first, because that's where your Daggerheart Nexus is going to exist. When you go to Demiplane, you'll have a list of all the different games that they currently offer. The one that we're going to zero in on, of course, is Daggerheart. Now, one of the things about Demiplane is that they have a first-class character generation system, which means if you're making characters on Demiplane, while they don't stitch over to anything specifically like different tabletops and whatnot, they can exist as their own character sheet for you to use while playing games. Now, right now, obviously, they don't have the D&D license, but Demiplane was purchased by Roll20, so there is probably some value in saying that they may integrate their official D&D into Demiplane. We might get an actual Demiplane D&D sheet. Now, one of the things that I do always when I pick up a new role-playing game is I dive right into making a character. You're probably wondering, why do I do that? Well, the big deal is that you can actually learn a lot about the game and how the game works by just making a character. Rather than slogging through pages and pages and pages of rules, just jump in and get your feet wet. So here we are at the Daggerheart Character Builder, and it's going to walk us through step by step. And the first thing it's going to want to know is obviously a character name. So I'm going to name this guy. Like I said, I've previously created this, so I'm going to just sort of recreate him. We're going to call him Grin. Okay, and he's going to use some pronouns of he, him. We're going to leave him at level 1. Now, I do have a portrait that I'm going to select for him, so I'm going to go ahead and select that now, but they do pre-populate ones that you can choose if you'd like. Now, classes in Daggerheart mirror a lot of what we're used to seeing in other fantasy games like Dungeons & Dragons. Now, we're going to have the typical ones that jump out at you immediately, like Bard, Druid, Ranger, Rogue, Sorcerer, Wizard. But Daggerheart iterates on a few of these different classes by giving them different names. And of course, once we actually get into the actual rule system of Daggerheart, you're going to see why they're different entirely. The one thing you're going to notice that each class has a pair of domains. Now, these domains are going to come in handy in a few steps, which basically gives us an outline as to the type of abilities and overall persona of the character. So you'll see Bard, for example, has Grace and Codex, whereas a Guardian has Valor and Blade. Now, a lot of these are kind of, not really informative, and you don't really know what the mechanics attached to it is. But when the rules start to come out, you'll see why these all make a difference. So for this particular character, I'm actually going to make a rogue. Don't blame me for being too traditional. So my rogue's domains are Midnight and Grace. And it's going to tell you the starting evasion score. Again, more on that when you actually get into the rules of it. And damage thresholds, as well as some other things about it as far as special abilities and background questions. Now, like I said at the intro here, these are playtest rules, and I do have it on good authority that some of these rules have changed. So again, just take this with a grain of salt until the game rolls out, but this will give you a rough idea of how Daggerheart plays. I'm going to select the rogue. Okay, now one of the things that's different about Daggerheart that I really like is that you actually go a little bit further into the development of your character right when you create it, such to the point as you actually pick a subclass. So you're not waiting until you play the game for your character to become immediately different than, say, another rogue who happens to be in your party, or just rogues in general. Daggerheart lets you choose a subclass right away as one of the key steps in making your character. So you'll see here that I have some subclasses available to me in the playtest rules. I have what's called a Nightwalker, and I have a Syndicate. And each of them come with a sort of a tangible card. So if you were playing the actual starter set or playing Daggerheart, you would actually have tangibles on the table. And that's one of the things I like about the character creation process. You're actually having stuff in front of you that make the character creation process a little bit more interactive, rather than just sort of opening up a book and just staring at the book and making decisions, right? I think it's time that we implement sort of, tangibles into our games that sort of make it a little bit more hands-on. So the Nightwalker is you can move from shadow to shadow. When you step into the shadow cast by another creature or object, or into an area of darkness, mark a stress to disappear from where you are and reappear inside of any other shadow within far range. When you do, you are hidden. They leap from shadows to shadows. Syndicate. So when you arrive in a prominent town or environment, you know somebody that calls this place home. Give them a name. Note how you think they could be useful and choose one from the list below. So I'm going to go with the Nightwalker. So I'm going to go up here and select it, and it's going to prompt me to set my traits. Now this is another cool thing. This is a variation of standard array in Dungeons and Dragons. So Daggerheart doesn't have ability score so much as just the modifiers. It's basically taking the modifiers of D&D and stripping out the scores. Taking the abilities of D&D and stripping out the scores and just focusing on the modifiers. You have 4 choices to make. So again, very much standard array. In this case, using the demi-plane system, you can actually go and use suggested traits. And it'll go at the top there and modify based on what you think a rogue should do. But you have that freedom to go ahead and select as you see fit down below by assigning your +2, your +1, your +1, and then you also have to choose a -1. And that's where the real sort of fun in Daggerheart comes out, is that right off the bat, you have to admit that your character is not going to be this perfect build. So I've just chosen the suggested traits. We're going to move on. Now, choosing starting weapons is another cool, unique thing that Daggerheart does well. They don't throw a massive amount of equipment at you, or at least in the playtest. The cool thing about that is that it focuses on a primary and a secondary weapon, and everything else really is just kind of secondary. One of my complaints about D&D over the years has been the fact that there's a lot of bloat when it comes to equipment and gear. And a lot of the times, 90% of the stuff on a character sheet never gets used, or there's no real gameplay mechanics for them to use the items. It's up to the DM to sort of implement equipment and gear appropriately as they need it. There's nothing really rules as written to say this is what these items do. So Daggerheart focuses on a primary and a secondary weapon, but they also allow you to have some flavor things like arcane gauntlets, which is a magical weapon. There's other things as well that can be classed as magic at the beginning. So your character has a little bit of flavor already embedded in him right at level 1. So in my case here, I'm actually going to take a pair of these arcane gauntlets. It's a primary weapon, and so I now have a secondary weapon. So for my secondary weapon, I'm going to take a dagger. Again, no one ever accused me of being creative. Moving on, we have starting armor. For armor, I don't know if the full game is going to come with a lot of different armors. Right now in the playtest, we pretty much just have 4 options. We have some padded armor, gambeson. We have leather, we have full plate, and chain. So at the moment, Daggerheart doesn't seem to have a lot of variety in that respect, but my guess is that the full version of the game will probably have some. For the sake here, I'm just going to take the leather armor. Now, starting inventory would be basically all the stuff that in D&D doesn't get used or doesn't really have a real reason except for the fact that your DM says you should take this. One of my goals in D&D is to start making equipment useful again. So in my games of D&D right now, I've started to implement rules on how bedrolls, tents, all that stuff that players don't typically think about, how it's actually used. So I've come up with some really neat ideas. I might share them with you in the future. For this one here, I'm going to take a health potion, and I'm going to take a grappling hook. Okay? And we're going to move on to domain deck cards. So domains were those 2 sort of, narrative sort of features of the Nightwalker class. In Daggerheart, domain cards are cards that you'll have on the table in front of you that reflect your special abilities. I guess in D&D you would call them your features, right? Whereas in D&D you get these features. Specifically, you have these features, and yes, in Daggerheart you do get some assigned, but you also have flexibility in other ones you can take. So you actually have that unique nature of your particular rogue, for example, versus somebody else's. It's not all a carbon copy as you play through the different levels. You're actually going to get to a point where you actually have to choose this or that. And also it comes into play in the fact that you can only have so many domains active at any one time, or domain features active at any one time. In this case, it's 5 during the playtest. So think of it as in D&D where you have a certain amount of abilities. And in D&D, you can get what's called ability bloat, where at higher levels, your character has so many features and traits that it's hard to keep track of. Well, in Daggerheart, you can only have 5 on the table. You can swap them out with other ones as you accumulate and level up, but you're only ever going to have 5 to choose from, so that you're actually not, kind of bloating your character with all these superpowers. So here, I'm going to choose a couple. I'm going to take Deft Deceiver. It's going to give me advantage on some of my abilities or some of my attacks and such. And the other one I'm going to take, this sounds pretty interesting, is Rain of Blades. Let's see what it says. It says, spend a hope. Hope is an actual resource in the game of Daggerheart that you can accrue. So spend a hope to conjure throwing blades that strike enemies very close to you. Make a spellcast roll, and all targets that you succeed against take D8 plus 2 magic damage. Using your proficiency, if any targets you hit are currently vulnerable, they take an additional 1d8 magic damage. So I like the artwork. It conjures a visual image, and I'm a visual learner. I'm going to take that Rain of Blades. Okay, we're moving quite along here. Now, in Daggerheart, like D&D, they've pivoted away from using the word race. So in this case, we're going to start dealing with our heritage. So there's 2 parts of it. There's an ancestry, which is your actual physical, who you are as far as your species goes. And then there's a community, and a community is sort of where you hail from. So this is where I would say the rubber meets the road with Daggerheart, is that they have really gone and expanded beyond traditional fantasy tropes of different races you can choose. So I'm going to click through them so you can get a visual. We have the Clank. And Clanks are sentient mechanical beings built from a variety of materials, including metal and wood. Okay. We have Dracona, your Dragonborn. Dracona resemble wingless dragons in humanoid form and possess powerful elemental breath. We have Dwarves. Dwarves are most easily recognized as short humanoids with square features, dense musculature, and thick hair. Wouldn't be a fantasy game without elves. Typically tall humanoids with pointed ears and acute tuned senses. Now, here we go. Fairies. Those of fairy ancestry are winged humanoid creatures with insect-like features. A faun. See, now we're getting into some of the real diverse, unique nature or species in Daggerheart. Resembles goats in humanoid form with curved horns, square pupils, and cloven hooves. And before you start laughing about it, I had one of my friends play a faun in the playtest adventure we did, and came up with a pretty cool character concept. The Furbolgs resemble cows in humanoid form, typically recognized by their broad nose and long ears. It's a monster in D&D. Fungrels resemble a mushroom in humanoid forms, myconids essentially. The Galapa, which is what we're choosing here, but I'll go through the rest for you. Basically, anthropomorphic turtles with large dome shell in which the head and limbs can retract. So, you know what? Yeah, I'm making a Ninja Turtle. Sue me. Giants. So again, sort of channeling that Goliath for 2024 D&D. Giants are tall humanoids with long arms, broad stature, and 1 to 3 eyes. I like how they threw that in there. We have goblins. Those of goblin ancestry are small humanoids typically recognized by their large eyes and massive membranous ears. Probably said that wrong. Halflings. There you go, wouldn't be D&D without these guys. Halflings are typically smaller humanoids with large hairy feet and prominent rounded ears. I love that the telltale feature of a halfling in all fantasy works are hairy feet. Humans. Blah. And this one is a different one. This is basically tieflings. Inferus. Those of Inferus ancestry are humanoids who possess sharp canines, pointed ears, and horns that come in a variety of styles. They're descendants of demons from the circles below. And we have this one, the Qatari. Are feline humanoids with soft fur and high triangular ears. So obviously tabaxi, but putting their own unique names, which is really cool. Okay. Then we have orcs. And with all the conversation surrounding D&D 2024 and how orcs are now a playable race and no longer a monster, you're going to get lots of people in arms about this, but there we go. The ribbits. You know, this was a tough one. I almost wanted to make a ribbit. Ribbit ancestry resemble anthropomorphic frogs with protruding eyes and webbed hands and feet. That's just too cute not to have in a game like this. And then lastly but not least is the Simia, which are basically Rafiki from Lion King, resemble anthropomorphic monkeys and apes with long limbs and prehensile feet. So there's a little sneak peek at all the Daggerheart species. Like I said, I'm going to choose Galapa to complete my Ninja Turtle. Now, community approaches the background concept by being a little bit more vague and not so much specific in exactly what your character did, but more of who's his community, where does he or she come from, and who does he align with as far as the type of people in the game world. So I'll run through these quickly. There's Highborn, so again, cards reflecting it, but more of a sort of an elegant society, noble, and that's sort of their community. I like the word community that they use. Loreborn, which are the studious that favor strong academic prowess. The Orderborn, which is basically faith, kind of like the Alkalites, I guess you could say, but more faith-oriented. Then we have the Ridgeborn, which are basically communities, kind of like barbarian-type tribes, but more about the rocky peaks and the mountains. The Seaborn, sailors, pirates. Slyborn, which are the city and urban criminals, con artists. The Underborn, the Drow, the Underdark, subterranean societies. Okay? Then the Wanderborn, which would be the nomads, traveling, moving from place to place. And then lastly, we have the Wildborn. So if you want that character who's in tune with the forest, your druids, your rangers. So for my character, I'm actually going to take Slyborn, which is more at home in the city streets. Again, rogue. Okay, and then last but not least, we now start moving away from sort of the tactile kind of methodical making choices. And now we get into the fun stuff, which is you making your character a little bit more complete through descriptions and you actually having a hands-on with the narrative. So choosing a description, for example, you would go in and you would decide what your clothes are. But the way that they frame it helps new players understand it, rather than just saying, what do you look like? Your eyes and all that stuff. They invoke sort of a narrative reaction. Clothes that are, so they're not asking you exactly what your clothes look like, but clothes that are tattered, for example. Eyes like coal. Dark eyes, right? They're trying to get you to use adjectives to flesh out your character as opposed to just sort of filling in the blanks. Body that's hardened. The color of jade. Attitude like a angry horse. I spelled horse wrong. So there's just some ways for you to evoke your character's image without going into a full-out descriptive or fill-in-the-blank type situation. Now, the other thing I like, and I hope they keep this in the full version, is background questions. So a lot of the times when crafting a background, players need a little bit of a nudge, a way to get their creative juices flowing. And not everybody's really good at creating background. I have some players that can just write a novel, and some players that just get stumped. So this prompts you in saying things like, hey, what did you get caught doing that got you exiled from your home community? So I'm going to say something really mean here. Beating up bullies. You used to have a different life from this one that you've tried to leave behind you. Who from that life is still chasing you? I'm going to say the head of the orphanage. I might be, again, leaning into some heavy-duty story tropes, but whatever. Who from that other life were you most sad to say goodbye to? My best friend. So again, nothing really like Shakespearean here, But again, I'm engaging with the character creation process in ways that I've never engaged with a role-playing game before. These are often things that are left on the last part of the character sheet in D&D and other games, where here Daggerheart is throwing this at you and saying, hey, here's some ideas. We're going to help you come up with some story elements. Now, this is probably going to be the hardest one, is choose your experience. Experience is like keywords. These are keywords that you're going to reference when playing the game and role-playing. But there are times during the gameplay mechanics where if you can reference an experience that's relevant to what's happening at the moment, you're going to actually get a modifier, and that's what that +2 is right there. So I'm going to say skulking. I'm going to say defender, sticking up for the little guy. And they give you some some ideas as well. Okay. And then here we go. Connections. What did I recently convince you to do that has gotten us both into trouble? Steal food to survive. I'm just coming up with stuff off my head. What have I discovered about your past that I hold secret from others? I used to live in an orphanage. What are you desperately trying to teach me that you'll feel I'll never understand? How to stick up for the little guy. I'll put that in quotation marks. Air quotes. Okay. So that said, I am done. And I'm going to click level up, and it'll give me an opportunity to play a higher tier character if I want, but like I said, I'm just going to leave this at level 1. And lastly, I'm going to click on my character sheet. So voila, you have your demi-plane character sheet. Again, like I said, the demi-plane character sheets exist in a bubble. They don't have any connective thread to any other virtual table. So this would kind of replace your pen and paper character sheet if you wanted to go this route. Some players do. I think Daggerheart is best played theater of the mind. So whether you use demi-plane as your character sheet or a print character sheet, as long as you have it for reference. And whatever virtual table your DM is going to use, then that's fine as well. Right now at the moment, there's not a lot of virtual tables that accommodate Daggerheart. So pen and paper theater of the mind is probably going to be how it's going to be played mostly. So here we have the layout. We have our evasion score. We have armor. We have all of our abilities at the top there. I was talking about domains earlier. So you're going to see right here, I have domain effects, which are the ones that I chose at the very beginning. And those are part of my loadout right there. I have 2 of them. Okay. And I can have up to 5 of them as well. Now I have domain features, or I have features which are separate from domain. So I do have some wiggle room for creating a loadout with more than just the 2 that I've got as I level up. And these are some of the inherent features that a rogue is going to get. It's a class feature, so all the rogues are going to get these. Now I know you're probably eager to get into what all of this does, and that's not the point of this video. So I will be covering all of this stuff in later videos, but for now I just wanted to give you guys a look at what this actually looks like as you create a character. I'll talk about armor, and I'll talk about hit points, and how all that comes together in a cohesive whole. As we work towards release, like I said, a lot of it's going to change. But if you can get the basics out of the way, and hopefully if they do have any sweeping changes, then you'll be able to adjust to them pretty quick and easy. My equipment is here. The details that I filled in as well. And there's a character journal as well. Now, one thing I'm going to note is that I really, really enjoy. Again, Daggerheart leans into a very minimalistic as far as stats and numbers and stuff. So if you look at gold, for example, the gold section of a character sheet simply refers to gold in the sense of handfuls. There's no hard currency as far as how many gold coins you have. And again, secondary to a narrative-based game. You know, how often do you see in Lord of the Rings, for example, Aragorn or any of the characters siphoning through the bags, counting how many gold coins they had? So this is their way of kind of encouraging you to look past the gold being the most important driving factor for a story. Likewise with bags, you know, you have a certain amount of bags of stuff. So I really like how they inject that narrative flair right into every aspect of the game. So that's about it. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope that you're going to enjoy this Daggerheart content. As always, if you have any comments, make sure you drop them down below in the comment section, and like and subscribe. And if you want to see more Daggerheart content, don't worry, we got you covered. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.